All right, it looks like we've got a pretty good crew here now, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Today's session will be recorded so that anyone who couldn't make it to the session today will be able to watch later on. If you have any questions throughout the session, drop them into the Q&A feature and our team will make sure that we get you an answer as soon as possible. We have an amazing webinar team today, so I'm just going to introduce everyone really quickly. First, we have Dinah Turner. She's our SharpCloud product director. Jorge Antonetti is our SharpCloud resident expert and is a software consultant. We're really lucky to have him. Jack is a SharpCloud product expert and will be walking us through a few demonstrations and examples today. And finally, we have Dave from Oracle. Dave has over 20 years of experience working across all facets of project and portfolio management. And we're really excited that he could be here with us today to share some knowledge. So I know they're all really excited to get to speak with you, so I won't delay any longer. Dinah, would you mind taking us through what we're going to discuss during today's session?
Of course. Thank you, Rebecca. That's great. So, and welcome, Dave, welcome, Jorge and Jack as well to today's session. I think it's going to be a really good one. So if you do have questions, please keep those flying in and we'll make sure that we make today relevant for everybody. What will I learn in this webinar today? So we have split today into 3 sections. We're going to have a session, first part of the webinar is with Jorge, who will talk to us a little bit around some of the challenges around alignment and road mapping alignment, which specifically was one of the problems that we had highlighted in our first of these road mapping series. Jack will then work through a demo with us about how to actually bring your alignment into your roadmap and using a couple of different products in that, including Oracle P6, which is a really great thing for us to demonstrate and show everybody as an Oracle partner. And then we'll be moving into the Q&A session with Dave. So as we step through today, I'm sure you'll have plenty of questions. So over to you, Jorge, for this summary really of what we're going to have a look at. We like to make these webinars interactive. We're hoping you learn a lot and you can take away a lot of activities from today. So Jorge, over to you. What will people be learning from you today?
Absolutely. Of course, right. What we see there on the screen is what we're going to go through, and you'll be able to walk away today with some actionable tactics and strategies, right, to maybe improve your roadmap alignment. And then, of course, Dave able to give us some real world application as to, how that actually goes. Of course, we'll start with, why even roadmap, right? What are the benefits that alignment brings us? Why do we need to maybe separate ownership from responsibility? Then how do we identify our stakeholders, achieve alignment between those stakeholders? And then what can we do overall to improve this element that we need, what we call depth of alignment?
Yeah, well, let's get started. So why do we need to even bother with road mapping?
I would say we bother with road mapping because roadmaps are just such an ideal tool for communication, right? They really streamline our efforts. And what we do, right, with roadmaps, of course, is they provide a visual overview, again, of our strategy and plan. So we start with our vision that we see on the left, right? We want to, reach 1 million visitors in our SharpCloud International Airport. Right? We have our external and internal forces and all the things that go into this roadmap. So our risks, right? The decisions that we need to align our strategy, of course, the market environment that breeds that strategy, and then our objectives and goals because of the market environment that we're in. Right, that there's a path there that we have to take. And what a roadmap does is just allow us to communicate that strategy, our work plan, right? How we'll reach that 1 million international flights by 2035 across a number of stakeholders, right? So it doesn't matter if they're external, like customers or shareholders, for example, or even suppliers, right? They can all look at one thing and be able to say, okay, I understand exactly where we're headed.
So roadmaps really help an organization understand where they're headed, what their objectives are, and all of that information right across. So next up then, we have, tell us the issues that people have with road mapping. What's going on with that?
Right, of course, as the title says here, right, a lot of us focus on the road map today and ignore the ping in road mapping, right? And it's an active verb, right? And we have to remember what road mapping is. And it's really, again, as it reads, a collection of that planning and alignment processes that we have, right, that allow us to achieve and set our goals over time. So think of it as really the framework that allows us to align, develop, and implement our strategic plan.
So let's jump forward onto the next sort of more complex process around road mapping for this then.
Exactly. So, right, what we're looking at here are all of these surrounding alignment processes, right, where the elements of road mapping are really established. So this is a very simplified, right, visual of, again, all of the processes that go into this. So not going to go through all of them, but the key takeaway here is we can see, right, a number, right, we have our strategy alignment processes, right? It's not just one process, it might be a number of those, and there might be a number of KPI approval processes. And it's in those subsets of processes that we start to establish the things that are needed for better alignment, so that sometimes, right, is a turn to a yes, totally. Right? So we understand exactly how our actions are impacting our progress towards our company's vision or organization's vision. So again, what we want to do in these areas is just make sure that the quality of our elements are correct, right? They're of high quality and they're helping everyone on our team understand exactly where they stand in a sense. And again, the final takeaway here is that our depth of alignment really encompasses all of this, right? It's all of these surrounding processes that we see here where planning is done, execution, data, right? Our vision is established. All of that depends on how well we can align together.
Yeah, that's true, Jorge. When we did the last webinar, everybody was commenting that alignment was their hardest and most challenging area of road mapping. So when we look at depth of alignment, which is obviously, we've talked about this before, Jorge, being part of the full value road mapping piece. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Right, so for full value road mapping, right, again, as we saw earlier, depth of alignment is the glue that holds all of those elements together, right? It's through our alignment processes that we establish a vision, right? It is then, that's how we plan as well. So who do we need to plan? Who's going to be a part of it, right? Then, of course, we move into execution. And then we take a look at, so of course, executing on that plan, making sure we detail our plan as much as we can. And of course, update our roadmap as time passes and reality changes. And finally, we need to bring in data, right? To verify those actions are impacting our vision as expected, right? We're moving along the right path. And what we're going to focus on today, of course, is depth of alignment, because again, it holds all of these together so we can be sure that we bring value to all of our stakeholders that are going to be maybe using this roadmap as a compass.
So this is a great reference, really. I suppose, yeah, you're right, a compass. So the depth of alignment, let's dig a little bit more into that if we can. So how does that manifest in an organization? What are we talking about when we're talking about depth of alignment?
So what we're talking about when we kind of go into depth of alignment is really who's the ultimate owner of the roadmap. And what I mean there is who's held accountable for roadmap performance. Right? It might not be the people who are building the roadmap. It might be an executive team or a manager, for example. Right? So looking at that vision and execution piece of those elements, then we're going to look at who's responsible. So again, who's responsible for building the roadmap? It might not be that the person who's held accountable is building the roadmap as well. It's going maybe their the direct team or another team is actually building the roadmap. So setting, okay, these are the items that need to be here, right? So that gets into execution. And we're going to look at who's involved. So who do we really need to make sure that this roadmap can come to life outside of those who are responsible and who might be accountable? So like our other influencing stakeholders, so to say. And then of course, tying all of those pieces together is how well then agreement or alignment is achieved between those groups. So again, getting to how well your processes work together and how well you're engaging your stakeholders as well. So what that really means, right, and what this does for us is that maturity or how well we're able to really grasp our hands on our depth of alignment. It determines the quality of our roadmaps, right? Again, there's a simple chart here. These like elements or variables are directly correlated to each other, right? How well or how deep our alignment maturity is. So if we have frequent and focused meetings with our key stakeholders, right, and everyone's engaged and actually providing feedback, right, we should see our roadmap quality then improve as well, because then it starts to bring value to not only the people who are building it, but to the people who might just be looking at it sparsely or infrequently to understand, okay, where are we, or where is this company headed in terms of their strategic direction? Or, for example, I'm a supplier looking at a company's roadmap. I might be able to understand, okay, where might I be able to fit in and help them out and actually expand their capabilities and execution.
Right. Okay. So that's us talking about that. So when it goes wrong, tell us a little bit about what happens then.
Right. So what we're going to get into now, right, is this key element, and that is this separation of ownership and responsibility. And what this clear separation does, right, it allows us to become aware of conflicts and solve them fast. So, of course, when we don't have separation, right, you get the classic, like, it was on them, that was actually supposed to be on that team. That wasn't us. And, things just kind of fall to pieces because no one is really sure of, okay, I'm held accountable for this item's success, for example, right? That leads us to priorities being misaligned, right? And then you might have some changes to your plan, to your work plan, and somehow dependencies aren't communicated, and all of a sudden the work that you needed isn't there to continue your work, right? But when we do, of course, we have the exact opposite, right? Delivery is aligned. We're able to actually increase independent efforts. So those dependencies that we may have relied on before, they might be able to actually, we can take some of this work and not need you for it right now and try to pull this along as much as we can. And in the end, right, we realize opportunity.
So different organizations have got different needs, obviously. Do you want to just give us a couple of examples here, Jorge, of how that might work?
Right. So yes, depending on your org size and your org type, right, your vision, right, the size of your vision will also kind of determine your roadmap environment. And we'll understand why a roadmap environment is very crucial to us in a little bit here. But for example, if you're a small org and you're focused on maybe one product, you might just have an individual roadmap where those teams are all in one place and contributing to that roadmap. Maybe just as a combined effort, for example, right? Or just maybe one sheet or one tool that this is the same roadmap that we have. Whereas maybe you have a larger organization where there are many pieces to that roadmap or to that vision that you have, right? So there might be a product, there might be a customer portion of it or marketing portion of it, right? And that is where you're going to have different roadmaps that maybe consolidate into a master roadmap. And that's where it gets hairy. But either way, it doesn't matter. What matters here is just understanding this determines our ecosystem, and that will determine what kind of alignment we're going to need moving forward.
Great. Okay. So yeah, how do we go about doing that then?
So this kind of allows us, right? Understanding our roadmap ecosystem allows us to start to identify who might be the roadmap owner, for example, and then who's going to be responsible for those roadmap items. So in that previous example, right, we're going to take the enterprise vision. So we have someone working on the planes, right, for our airport, someone working on the terminal, right, and then someone finally working on the air traffic control tower that we need. And these are the teams then that are responsible for these pieces, and they might have their own roadmap because it's such a large portion, right, of the vision. And that then they again consolidate into a larger roadmap where this is where the owner comes in, of course. So maybe the executive that they all report to, right, or just a direct manager who's been made responsible to consolidate everything and make sure it all makes sense, right? These are kind of like the connecting the dot pieces. And then, of course, we have our vision and strategy setters. So our executive team, right, the people who said, this is the direction that we want to head. Hey, how do we make this possible? And we can begin to identify those owners by looking at, again, who is held accountable to present and report to those vision and strategy setters.
Great. So a lot of people involved. As we all know, the more complex your project, the more people are involved with that project. And so how do we go about doing more with that in that case, Jorge? So
what we can start to do then is, now that we understand who might be held accountable, so again, who at the end, if the team doesn't deliver, is going to take the fall here, or right, be blamed, right? We can start to then, and then of course the teams that we have along in that same lane, right? We can start to identify these stakeholders that then surround them. And that allows us, again, to get our full stakeholder picture. what we want to do is categorize them as well. So when we don't identify and categorize our stakeholders, right, very simple, right? We just don't have the correct people at the right time. We lose buy-in, right? And we just open ourselves to more opportunity loss. Versus when we do identify and categorize our stakeholders, and again, our stakeholders that surround our roadmap responsibles and our owners, right? We start to understand who we need to involve at the right time. We can increase buy-in from those key influencers, and again, just open ourselves up to more opportunity gain.
So obviously people are really important in this picture. We always come back to it being a people problem, I guess, don't we? So how do we go about doing that? Do you want to talk us through a little bit of stakeholder mapping and how you might apply that to your alignment?
Absolutely. So, right, again, using a simple 4-quadrant approach, right, we can start to identify and categorize our roadmap stakeholders. And again, we see here at the center of this graphic, we have our roadmap team. So we have our responsibles and our owners. And we want to start to look at the stakeholder groups that surround them to understand, okay, what category might they fall in? So for example, right, we want to maybe keep satisfied our high influence and less interested stakeholders. So that might be a shareholder, for example, or maybe it's a specific executive, right, whose team isn't responsible for this roadmap portion, right, or they might just support a team that's responsible for delivering on the roadmap. Then, of course, speaking of the team that's responsible for delivering on the roadmap, these are the stakeholders that you want to manage closely, right? So they have high influence and high interest, right? They impact these roadmap items directly. So again, that can just be the product team. It can be your engineering team, for example. Whoever is basically held responsible for delivering, they're going to fall into this category. So what we want to do, of course, is start to categorize our stakeholders in these categories to start to identify maybe how do we approach them? How do we engage these stakeholders? How do they fall into one of these 4 categories?
So we have a method of doing this, which I think Becca's going to stick into the chat for everybody. There's a link there. SharpCloud has a really neat little template for doing your stakeholder mapping, which then allows you, of course, to push that into your alignment and to your roadmap as well, because it's a digital stakeholder map. So if you can just tell us a little bit more here, Jorge, about why that matters, what happens in there, how do you actually go about doing that?
Right, and what we're looking at here is basically like a snippet of that template that Becca just shared, right? So what that template will allow you to do is to not only identify them, but start to outline your approach for engagement. And really our engagement approach is everything, but it's driven by the categories that we've assigned those stakeholders to, right? And also the discussions that we are going to need, or driven by the visual components that we're going to need to drive those discussions. So looking very quickly here, right? This is just a snippet of, or an example of what you might do, for example, based on the category that your stakeholder falls into. So you manage closely stakeholders who have high influence and high interest. Right? You might engage them weekly or bi-weekly, and the outputs of that meeting are going to be maybe work plan changes and decision points. What I mean by decision points are things that you can agree on that need to be escalated to the next level, right? And what these outputs are driven by, or they are generated by, are making sure that we use visuals during those meetings to focus on the correct alignment objectives. And what the visuals allow us to do is just simplify the complex, right? So we're going to simplify the problem, maybe understand the underlying data there, and then be able to identify the problem areas. And then, of course, our roadmap team then facilitates those engagements. So a combination of the responsibles and owners are going to engage the stakeholders needed to guide those discussions and find the work plan changes, find the decision points that are needed, and then escalate as required.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you, Jorge. So I don't know if we've got any questions coming in. So it's really the way that we've broken down this, we're sort of experimenting with our webinar approach. And the last time we spoke to everybody, there were lots of feedback around how do we do alignment? How do I do this? So obviously what we're doing here is responding with, this is a lot of the focus around the people part of your roadmap. How do you align the people to your roadmap and the activities, and how do you do that stakeholder management? So one of the next areas, of course, that's really important in our alignment is also our data and our tools and our processes that line up into that as well. So Jorge, thank you so much for your time on the sort of alignment processes and the strategy for alignment. I think that's been really valuable. Please do put your questions into the Q&A. If you've got any questions for Jorge, we can pick those up. But as we go forward here, I'd like us to move over, if we can, please, Jack, to you're going to share us a sort of demo of how you actually might pull in different data into a roadmap. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen, and then I'm going to ask Jack to share his screen, and he can talk us through how this might work in a practical example.
Great, thanks so much, Dinah. Hopefully everyone can see SharpCloud story here. And as Dinah says, I'm going to take you through how we can connect that into a variety of different data sources. You can see here a standard SharpCloud story. We've got a dashboard here that's pulling out a lot of key information, has different navigation panels that will take you through different views. And each of those views is going to let you analyze data that you have sitting in SharpCloud, the same data in each view, but will let you look at it from a different angle every time, cut and slice it in new ways to get at new insights. If I show this layer view here, that's layering projects against strategies, this is kind of the endpoint that you would often reach in bringing your data into SharpCloud. But to demonstrate how SharpCloud can be used to take data from different sources and how we can work with that, what I'll do is just take all of these projects and delete them out of the story. And then what I'm going to do is use this connector to pull data into the SharpCloud story and let us work with it. So if I quickly just jump across to P6, you can see we've got all of this data sitting in here relating to the projects. If I drill down into the codes as well, I can see that it's all geared around strategic objectives, and it's all building on the same things that are in the story. If I go back to this connector here and run the P6 connector, what we're going to see is that that view where I just deleted all of the projects from has been repopulated with all those projects coming in from that P6 view. Once they're in, I can do things like connecting them into the strategies themselves, filtering between them, but also a lot of the information around their connection into those strategies is sitting in P6 as well, as we saw when we moved through the codes. So I can also run a further connector to bring in those connections. And if I go back to that view now, you can see it's populated with all of the links between the projects and the strategies. I can then filter to the ones that have certain strategies aligned, filter to the ones that have no strategic alignment, move around in different ways and look at the same information, all from different angles. Once it's in, then we can also access different views, all of which are going to be presenting them in new ways. So this grid view here is really good for highlighting just how much is at stake in the projects that don't have alignment. If we look at this swim lane here that has no label, and we just filter for projects that don't have a strategic alignment, we can see that that swim lane is containing all of those projects that aren't aligned. And we can see in the cost tracker up here just how much of the total value is at stake in these projects that we haven't aligned correctly. So what SharpCloud is letting us do here is take this information that's sitting in P6, put it against data that we have sitting in SharpCloud, and then see how well aligned it is with our overall goals. If I move through into this view, you can see a roadmap as we were talking about throughout this webinar, taking again all of that same project data. Within each of the strategies, I can open up all of them and get that information sitting behind them. I can also focus in on the relationships that any given strategy has to specific projects, see where they're sitting along a different timeline. And I can do things like focus in on specific sponsors that have connections to those different projects. I can also access things like cost data, budget data, all of which is sitting in different nested tables. Again, all focused around these projects that we're sitting in P6 that we've been able to pull through into SharpCloud. I can also do things like move things around in a workshopping capacity between different swim lanes in different views, focus in on swim lanes, focusing on sponsors, or swim lanes focusing on specific goals that we're aligned to, all of which is just letting us understand better how everything fits together into a bigger picture, and also make changes dynamically, collaboratively with other people when you're talking through the story itself. If I open up this view, though, you'll see that it's empty, and that's because the data that would populate this is not actually sitting in P6. Instead, if I move through to Excel, you can see that it's sitting in Excel. So we've got the project code from P6 here, and then these columns are augmenting that with new data. So just as the poll showed, often you will have data sitting in lots of different spaces. If I move back to SharpCloud,
to note, really. Yeah, it's important to note that, Jack, because not everyone's all, very few of us are in one system. As I was saying before we started this, it's information in different places. How can I get some total view, some holistic view of what I need to know?
Precisely. And as you can see, that Excel data currently is not sitting in SharpCloud. These plant, CapEx, and OpEx variables are empty. But if I go back to the connector that we were viewing earlier on in the story, I can also connect in to Excel and bring all of this information together. So both the P6 data and the Excel data now being brought into SharpCloud. If I go back to that view that was just empty, you can see now it's been populated with all of that information about different plants, about CapEx and OpEx. And then once again, just as we were doing with the P6 data that we pulled in, we can look at it in lots of different ways. So graph CapEx against OpEx, focus specifically on different plants and their total value. And also we can connect it up to the P6 data that we have sitting in SharpCloud. So really letting us bring all of these different things into alignment and then plan around them and see the different connections and the contingencies. So the last view I'll show is a more advanced table, pulling all of this data together in another way and letting us see different year-end data versus different financial data, just to give a hint of the place that we can take it to. But the key takeaway is really how much we're able to align everything together, pull it in from all of these different spaces and see how it connects up. So that's some of the things SharpCloud can do with connectors and with alignment. I'd be happy to take any questions on this.
Okay. Have we got any questions coming through, Becca, from this in terms of having a look at bringing in different systems information?
I don't see any at the moment.
Not yet. So thanks for that, Jack. It's useful for us to understand. So we've looked at the people, we've looked at the process and the tools and the data coming in. So all of that is giving us visibility. It doesn't do the job for us, but it makes the job a whole lot easier, I think. So I'm keen if anyone has got any questions on that. And thank you, Jack. One of the points on that is that until you see your own data in that sort of thing, it can be quite hard to understand. So I think really it's useful to have a look at it in that respect. Test it out with some of your own data, for instance, will probably be quite useful. So I'm just going to go back to sharing my screen, and thank you again, Jack, for that. We're on to our third sort of and most important chapter of our webinar now. So thank you for your time, Jack, there. And obviously any questions anyone's got, we're all going to be around at the end of the panel. So if you have any of those questions that you want to bring forward, do please put those in the Q&A. So next we have our guest for today. And we're really pleased to be joined by Dave. We are part of the Oracle partnership at SharpCloud. So we are proud to be working with Oracle. We had a great week last week at the Oracle Innovation and Industry Lab at Reading, working with various people there who were looking at their own challenges in their organization. And so I'm really pleased, Dave, that you've been able to join us today. And you bring with you, well, it says here 20 plus years of experience. Do you want to just tell us a little bit more about what you've been doing to sort of up to this point?
Oh, you bet, Diane. And thanks for the opportunity to be here. And before I start, I just want to say what Jack just showed should get everybody really excited. It is the epitome of discipline across a project lifecycle. And we'll get more into that in a second. So yeah, so I'm Dave Bullard. I'm part of Oracle's construction engineering team. Focus on industry innovation, really spend a lot of time with utilities. So my background, I grew up in Oklahoma, right here in the middle of the US. Now I live in St. Louis, worked in the sulfuric acid industry for a couple of years, designing plants, made beer for Anheuser-Busch. For 10 years, I did projects, estimating, and competitive intelligence. And then I spent 10 years with Ameren, which is a utility where I live in St. Louis, doing project and portfolio management, project controls. So, throughout my entire career, I was using Oracle products, P6, Unifier, and I just developed such a passion for it. I said, hey, let's go to Oracle. And so, I've been with Oracle now about 4.5 years, and I get to talk about capital planning, long-range planning a lot. It's a passion of mine. I think when you say Primavera, when you say P6, anybody that builds anything big can probably relate to that. But there is the other side, which is this strategic planning. And that's where I really went from hey, Dave, you know, you're really good with Excel, you're really good at spreadsheets, go get a gold star for staying all night, to thinking, hey, there's a more elegant, efficient way to do this that can enable better outcomes. So anyway, that's just a quick little bit about me.
Well, that's great. Thanks, Dave. So we've looked a little bit at what we do with these webinars. We have a bit of theory and a bit of, you know, learning at those, and we're looking, as we keep touching on, the people, the process, the technology. So often we think about the soft benefits, the people side of alignment, and we think about how we invest into our planning processes. Do you think that we are okay to think about the soft side of it, the people problems, as well as we are on the hard savings? How would you think about that?
Well, I think, you know, I kind of look at it two ways, Dinah. First of all, there's the cold, hard capitalist way, which is, you know, I always come back to competition. I also played football for 11 years and coached, so very, very competitive. And I think, you know, day-to-day tactical stuff, I think we can handle, we can put out fires. But, you know, when you look at the value of a stock price or the health of a company, it's all based on the future. So I think if you can't get the people operating units, you know, engineers, operations, project managers, if you can't get them on the same page as the executives, as the leadership team coming up with strategy, no matter how well you execute, no matter what you do with P6, your outcomes aren't going to be what you want. You're not going to get the long-term health. And, you know, you could be looking for something else to do. Now, that's the cold, hard capital side. Now, the human side, believe it or not, I know I'm a technology guy, but to me, the people are the most important thing. You watch the people and you can tell if you're doing things right. So, you know, my manager, it constantly reminds me of highest and best use. Okay. You think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Okay. And put it in our world. Okay, if you're at the bottom, copying and pasting, doing Excel kung fu, VLOOKUPs, then you're not spending the time doing the important stuff, and you don't feel like you're adding the right value, and you're probably not. So, you know, what I see when you get the alignment, when you know you're working on the right thing, when you have the kind of tool that can do what Jack just showed a second ago. So instead of copying and pasting and checking, now you're really getting in, looking for, you know, better investment opportunities, truly scrutinizing your opportunities, and also, quite honestly, building a bridge and building credibility between the business side of the company and the operations and project management. And, you know, the last thing I'll say, you know, Oracle is a member of the Construction Industry Institute, all about project delivery. You know, SharpCloud is getting engaged with CII as well. And CII is even acknowledging, after 40 years, hey, it's not just doing the projects right, you need to do the right projects. So yeah, you know, I mean, I think there are, you know, absolutely soft benefits. And if you do things right, those soft benefits will hit the bottom line. You'll see your employees contributing more, and you'll just see more engagement.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that we have this sort of, it's a bit of a holy grail of employee engagement, really, because we've all worked in organizations where we're not engaged. Mm-hmm. And we talked a lot about earlier this year, there's a lot about this quiet quitting, you know, that people aren't really optimized. And if your team aren't optimized, and if you're not working in an aligned way, in an aligned space with people, you're not going to be achieving what you need to do. It's simply not going to happen.
You know, Diana, you know, when I look at, you know, I'll just go back to what Jack showed a minute ago. You know, if you have an individual contributor that thinks, I'm just an analyst, I'm just a button pusher, a bean counter, something like that, and you give him or her the type of capability that Jack showed, okay, what that individual can do can develop a long-term plan, present it, come up with visualizations and relationships using SharpCloud that you just can't get with Excel, that you just can't get with PowerPoint. And now you've got a person that says, oh, you know, you go from I'm a number cruncher to, hey man, you know, people might not want to acknowledge it, but I just put together our 5-year plan, you know, and that's, I've watched that happen. And that used to be part of my edict to people is don't be a victim. Look what you have the power to do. And I think Jack just showed a quick intro, and you can go a lot of different directions from there.
Yeah, for definite. No, I agree. And so that's like, it's really switching them up a gear, isn't it? So, And that's also leads us on to think about why it's so important in some ways to tell a story, because we are human beings. So it's important to tell a story with your projects, but also with your investment plan. So why should we care about how we tell our stories? What's in your experience matters about that?
I think you just hit the nail on the head. I mean, anybody that's presented or gone to any class, they tell you, tell stories. People can relate to the stories. I could rattle off 52 impressive facts and everybody would just roll their eyes because I'm some nerd. But when you start telling stories, now people can relate to it. And when you can lay it out, when you can tell your business story in a way that engineers can understand, that finance, planners, strategic planning can understand, what you're really doing is you're showing that you know your business. And I'm going to go back to the word credibility again. And, when I was at Ameren, I was in non-nuclear generation, heavy coal fire. And there's very few places on the planet where coal is popular these days. And, typically we would make the biggest cuts. And after we put some strategic planning, some portfolio management in place, when those requests for cuts came out, we turned them around in 2 hours. And instead of being the ones that took the biggest cuts, we became the ones taking the smallest cuts because we were telling the story. We were defending what we needed. Because one of the other problems, and you talk about telling the story, one of the biggest problems I see time after time after time is a financial group going down to an operations or engineering team and saying, look, for the last 3 years, you've told me the sky is falling. You need X million dollars, X million pounds, whatever, to do these 200 things. And you've never come anywhere near doing that. You're still spending the money, but I don't believe that you need the money for what you say. You're not telling the right story. And so what we were able to do is say, look, here's how everything we're doing ties to our strategy. Here's how everything we're doing is going to grow our revenue and reduce this thing called regulatory lag, just lost appreciation.
Exactly. So really, that's back to it again. It's this golden thread, isn't it? Back through to the strategy of what you are trying to deliver, and then being able to back up with data your story around why you've done that and what that sort of organizational need is for you. And we're all operating in this world, this scarcity of resources, I think we've referred to it as, which is we're all fighting and we're all competing and we're all having to cut and we're all having to do more with less. So how do we use sort of road mapping to make sure, like you've said before, we're having the right conversations? How can we make sure that we're having the right conversations around the right projects?
Well, I think the focus of this section, the word alignment, is your simple one-word answer. Now to expand on that, if you accept, and I think we should accept, that our leaders are coming up with the right strategy, the right long-term goals, initiatives, et cetera, then I think it's incumbent upon us in the planning space to associate every dollar we spend with some component of our strategy. Now it can be a 5-year, 10-year, it doesn't matter. But, when you've got people fighting for money, and nobody that I know of has infinite money, there are not infinite capital resources. So I think if you can not only align, but then quantify the way that your investments add value to the bottom line. So it could be total shareholder return, it could be safety, it could be sustainability. There's all these measures. I think when you're looking at scarcity of resources and you've got people making decisions, what's going to move the needle on stock price, what's going to keep this company around, once the decisions are made at a high level, what needs to be done, then you can use these tools. You can use the P6, the SharpCloud, other products to go in and say, okay, here's how we align. And now I'm going to go back to competition and I'm going to show you why in sustainability my projects are better, or why in revenue increase or transportation cost reduction, why my projects are better than yours. Because, in one way or another, we're all competing all the time.
That is true. Everybody, exactly. We're all out there. We're all out there trying to just, make our businesses successful, make our businesses survive in some cases, and make our businesses thrive in other cases. So it's been really interesting to think about it from that that perspective and why the story matters so much. So,
and Dinah, real quick, you just made me think of something else. One of the biggest reasons, and I apologize for interrupting, but I got all excited. Portfolio management and capital planning wasn't as sexy and fun to talk about forever. I mean, when I first came into Oracle, it's, oh, Dave's a one-trick pony, he wants to talk about capital planning. I tell you what shined a big light on it was COVID. And you saw people, and one example I remember was UPS cutting $1 billion out of a 5-year plan like that. So, you don't need to be a CPA or CFA to know that, as revenue goes down, so does free cash, therefore so does capital. And so not only can you go compete for more dollars, but when times get rough, you do everybody's favorite word, proactive. I mean, I work for Oracle, that, it's inherent in our name, be forward-looking, proactive, not reactive. And so while you can go fight for more money, you can also say, okay, Dinah just told me I need to cut $50 million a year. Well, now I can instantly go back and make that happen.
Exactly. And visibility is the big thing here, isn't it? It's not combing through lines and lines of data to find the thing that might help you. It's that visibility and connection, like Jack was showing us there. These are projects that are not aligned to strategy. This is something that is not clearly assigned to taking us in the direction that we have set. So we need to, just having visibility of that and the ability to sort of challenge that, understand it, work out whether it should be aligned or is it something that should be stopped. We've all talked about it in simple terms: start, stop, and continue. What things should we carry on with? What things should we actually stop and readdress? Are they not going to take us to where we want to go? So what's been your biggest lesson learned, Dave, in your time at Oracle in terms of like digital transformation, moving into this space and road mapping? What's right up there in terms of your learnings?
I would say be okay with little wins. I think you can watch what Jack showed and be mesmerized and think you're going to turn on a dime. But when you really get into the organizational change of what was represented in there, the discipline in your schedule system, the discipline in assigning the right strategic code, descriptor to those projects, and then getting that set up in SharpCloud in a way that it's meaningful to a lot of different audiences. There's a lot baked into that. I'm not saying it's hard, but the organizational change management, is a challenge. And what I see is people want to go from spreadsheets and paper to Buck Rogers in the 25th century in 6 months. And it becomes very frustrating, because, back to the point of this session, alignment is hard to get. So, my biggest lessons learned is, rather than try to turn the whole ship 180 degrees, let's go find one group that's willing, one group that's got a lot of pain, and let's try to define a quick win, not just because it's good for people, but as you look at, the new wave of people coming in, their style is not to wait 2 years. I mean, I've been on plenty of projects where, hey, 2 years from now, we'll be done and we'll have a new air conditioning system in a brewing cellar, or we'll have a new reheater in a boiler at a power plant. Yay. Well, you're at a big risk for losing people when you do that. So I would just say, be willing to start small. And then instead of running around trying to jam change down people's throat, you're going to have them coming to you because they're going to hear about the success you had. And that's something I saw at Ameren, because I was so excited and I wanted everybody to do what I was doing, and that went nowhere. But eventually, as we kept stacking wins, people were coming to us saying, hey, what is it you guys are doing? Because it's working.
Wow, that's really insightful and really helpful, Dave. We're talking all the time with our customers, and the biggest challenge for them tends to be this change management space, and how they like you said, they find the people who are feeling the pain, the people who are willing to change, the early adopters, if you would, into understanding they could do something differently. Have you got any tips about how you identify those people? How you find them in an organization?
Yeah, for me, I'm always kind of looking for somebody that really, really knows their stuff and can really articulate what they're doing. One of the things we try to avoid is going too far down a road with a software transaction where people don't know their process. So, if somebody's saying, oh man, reporting's kind of tough, well, tell me why reporting is tough. Capital planning is, when somebody can't really articulate that, that's not going to be a great place to start. But if you've got somebody, and this was my experience too when I was at Ameren, was I had a team that they were all 20 to 35 year people. When I got there, they knew stuff inside and out. And so I worked with them and learned and went through the pain myself. And so, you need to find, people that understand the process, because if you can't do the process in a spreadsheet, on paper, whatever, none of this software is going to fix any problems, period, hard stop, just stop right there. So you need to understand the process, but you also have to have some kind of an appetite for change, because if people go into it saying, well, this is just another software application I'm going to have to learn, you're going to have a hard time. So what I tend to look for are the really sharp people who push me, that, challenge me, push back on me, and kind of, excuse the phrase, call BS on me sometimes, make me work hard, and also have a willingness to embark on a change journey.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And how do you keep your energy, Dave, when you're going through through a change process like that? What gives you energy? What keeps you moving forward?
It's always about the people. I mean, first of all, I can say I'm type A and I like to be successful and all that, but everybody's getting capital planning done. You can't go to a publicly traded company and open up their stuff and not find what they're spending from a CapEx perspective. So that's, work is getting done. What gets me jazzed up is when it gets done more efficiently. When you go from 90 minutes to justify a project to 3, when meetings go from 2 days to 2 hours. And honestly, part of it, I just want to get to a point where we can go in, pound our chest and brag and say, look, this is what we're getting ready to do. And then we do it. My favorite meeting in 25 years now, 26, was one of my last capital planning meetings at Ameren. And I told our senior vice president, we'll be out of here in 2 hours. I will be across the street at Starbucks. And typically those were 2-day meetings, but because of how we could present the information, the only question on the table was, did the plant managers buy into the projects we had selected? And so, he looked to his left, looked to his right, everybody nodded their head. We were aligned at the macro level with the total, and then also in the buckets, sustainability, safety, et cetera, things like that, compliance. And the meeting was over very, very quickly. Good.
And shorter meetings, really, they're going to work for everyone, aren't they, Dave?
Oh, yeah. Well, especially nowadays, man, we're getting, you can be on Zoom 12 hours a day if you want.
Yeah. So it's one of the things that Birkin touched on, actually, when we were last week at the industry lab for Oracle. He was saying everyone loves a robot, everyone loves a shiny robot, or something really advanced, and we all get excited about that kind of innovation. But really the value that a lot of people will get is the small process change things that radically alter how you work. So those are the things that actually give you real innovation. They really unlock what you can do in your organization. And it was great to be at the Oracle Lab and understanding that last week.
Well, I couldn't agree with Birch more. In fact, when I'm presenting on change or transformation, and I would invite everybody at your computer right now, go to your browser, type in the word innovation, and see what Merriam-Webster has to say about it. And it's not drones, artificial intelligence, all this cool stuff, which, I love. I get a kick out of that too. It's a change in an idea, process, or a thing. Okay. And so, yeah, the dogs are fun. The drones are fun. We're hearing more and more about that. But I like when people can go home earlier. I like when our work is right. And not just quality of life, but once again, credibility. I mean, Excel doesn't make mistakes, but it's going to give you exactly what you tell it to. So, if you've got some Excel folks on the phone that know about the VLOOKUPs, COUNTIFs, SUMIFs, all that, they work, But boy, if you're off a column, you know, you're going to be wrong, even though Excel's doing things right.
Great. Okay. I don't know if we have any questions that have come through to the Q&A, Becca.
We did have one come through. Madeline answered it for us in the chat, but it was just if we have any training videos on how you can get your data into SharpCloud as a beginner. So just a quick answer for that. We do have webinars on demand that you can go watch on getting your data into SharpCloud. I'll send that link to everyone in the chat now, so that everyone has access to it. But that is the only one that has come through so far.
That's great. Thank you very much. So, David, thank you so much for your time. What we'll do is obviously we'll be sharing this webinar out afterwards, and we can follow up if there are further questions that come through. So it's been really great, and thank you very much for your time and your insights and your knowledge really that you've shared over storytelling and your experience. It's been fabulous to have you here. Thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure, Dinah. I always enjoy seeing SharpCloud. Appreciate it.
Thank you. So for our further help here and resources, there's a little bit more that we can share with you. We shared in the link earlier the stakeholder mapping template, which is powered by SharpCloud, and there's a link that Rebecca sent out that you will be able to use. We have a free consultancy session to test some of your data. So if you're interested in some of the things that Jack showed us there with the P6 and the Excel connector, we can help you to test out a little bit of safe data in that and show you some of the possibilities that you could do. We also have our road mapping as a service where our consulting team can come and help you think about what your road mapping looks like and how you could tell us a little bit about your process, and we can see where we can help you in that space. And following on from our other road mapping webinars, we have, of course, our sort of maturity assessment that might help you understand where you want to address first. So next in our series, so this is just going to touch on what we covered here today in terms of the content that Jorge ran through about road mapping and alignment. But our next in our road mapping series is coming up on the 25th of May, and that is going to look at SWOT-based road mapping, with Emo is joining us from the Institute for Manufacturing at University of Cambridge, and they're going to share with us a little bit more information about how you might want to focus on your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats to drive forward your road mapping, to pick up what opportunities and new areas you might want to look into as a business. So back a bit to, as we were talking with Dave about how we're all sort of wanting to survive and thrive in a scarcity of resource. You know, there's a different way of looking at that the IFM are going to go through with us on the 25th of May. The dates for June, July and September are set, and we're heading towards our larger road mapping event in October. So if you have any questions, please put those into the Q&A or any questions into the chat, and we can make sure that we pick up your input for those sessions as we come further towards our event in October. So again, thank you everybody for your time today. I really appreciate all of your insights and inputs. Thank you to Jorge, thank you to Jack, thank you to Dave, and thank you to Rebecca for keeping us all on target. Appreciate your time. Bye, everyone.